Hello, everyone. You are welcome to the first Climate and Environmental Action Affinity Group event of the term, termed Partners in Preservation. We will be discussing the UNESCO mission and the role in the USA, as well as the implications of the US UNESCO split and what that means for our national heritage. And we're very lucky and privileged to have some wonderful and amazing speakers that you will get to hear from pretty soon. But before we dive into the conversations for today, we'll be doing a quick introduction. My name is Oyin. As I mentioned, I'm a physician scientist, and I'm also the co-chair of this affinity group at UNA USA. I would just want to share a little bit about my experience at the just concluded UN General Assembly. As some of you know, that happened simultaneously as the New York Climate Week. And it was such an amazing experience. It's always a very busy week in New York. And if you found yourself in New York that week, I hope that you took the trains more than you took the cars because there was traffic everywhere and everywhere was literally, packed with people. But it's always an amazing time of the year, especially for people who are interested in the climate and environmental action space. For this year, as always, it brought together leaders, researchers, youth advocates, and innovators, all working towards one goal, which is building a healthier planet for all. And I attended so many events, as I said. This was one of the quotes from one of the events that I attended that really stood out to me, and I wanted to share with you all, which reads, "The health of our people and the health of our planet are inseparable. Every degree of warming, every ton of plastic, every degraded acre of farmland is a health issue waiting to happen." As someone who is interested in climate change and how it impacts our health, I attended a lot of health related events, but I also attended so many other events that are not directly related to health, like sustainable agriculture events, and everything really had something that had to connect with health, which is very important. Um, One of the events I attended was the Plastics and Human Health Symposium at NYU Langone Health. And this was very important because it talked about how microplastics are finding their way into our food, into our water, and even our bodies. And this was just a reminder of how deeply environmental issues affect our personal health, whether we know that or not. And throughout the week, one message kept echoing to me. The climate crisis is not just an environmental issue, it is a human issue, and it affects how we live, how we eat, and how we survive on this planet. So that's about it about my experience, and I hope that as many people were who were able to attend this event, I hope that you had a great time, and it was a great experience for you.
Well, Ian, thank you so very much for that. And that was such an interesting perspective that you shared in terms of your own experience at what is known as UNGA or Climate Week. So we really, really appreciate you sharing your perspective. Um, and so we've had a little bit of time, hello everyone, to get to know each other with a quiz on UNESCO sites in the US, to hear from our UNA USA co-chairs. And I just wanted to say a quick thank you before we dive into the meat of our program. Quick thank you to our UNA USA Climate and Environmental Action Affinity Group co-chairs, Sierra and Oyen, along with our staff supports, Maya and Sarah, who are on this evening. And you'll be hearing from quite a few other people. And I just wanted to say that this couldn't have been a more timely program to have. I'm sure that people who are joining today, whether you are a UNA USA member, you're familiar, or you're more familiar with your national parks than you are with our movement, Today is such an important program to have, given that our global institutions and our grassroots action really are meant to intersect to protect our planet. And our discussion today focuses on just one of those many different intersections, but that's the role of the UN, UNESCO, and national parks in climate and conservation. So thank you again for taking the time. And as I mentioned, it's a very critical time. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the fact that the US government, our current administration, has decided to once again withdraw from UNESCO, which I recognize that we should just pause and slowly mention that's the UN's Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, so UNESCO. Um, And this withdrawal is supposed to be effective at the end of 2026. So while we have a little bit of time, that process has already been initiated. And that process really is casting a huge shadow of uncertainty over our nation's commitment to multilateralism, not just because of UNESCO, but some of you also may be familiar with the US's withdrawal or retreat from the Paris Climate Treaty, etc. And I don't know if you all recognize, but this would be in 2026. The withdrawal will be the third exit for our country from UNESCO, and the second time under a Trump administration. Excuse me. And I want to say that, you know, this on again, off again pattern between the US and UNESCO really raises some profound questions about our long-term stability and support for our nation's most vital and protected areas. So our national parks, our World Heritage Sites, our biosphere reserves, which we'll dig into in just a few minutes. And this is really exactly why this conversation about climate change, about environmental action, is so important to us at UNA USA. We are here to discuss, to dig deeper into how advocacy for people living in the United States can bridge this gap between global policy and local protection. Fortunately, we have with us speakers who have not just kind of been bystanders to this history. They have truly and actively shaped history and are true advocates of UNESCO and are, I guess, if you're okay with us calling you this, conservation activists. They have been at the very center of creating and sustaining these global connections. And I would say it's very fair to say helping to actually draw out blueprints for how we protect the planet, especially our most precious places, while we're trying to navigate, you know, these challenges as far as the US involvement within the UN system. So with that, I'm very pleased to bring onto the virtual stage with me three esteemed speakers in this area, and you'll have a chance to take a look at their bios more closely by checking out the link in the chat. But let me briefly introduce Sarah Gaines, who is Director of International Programs at the Coastal Resource Center at the University in Rhode Island, who brings deep expertise from her time at UNESCO's MAB Secretariat, which we will talk about, Man in Biosphere, and her pioneering work on UNESCO Global Geoparks and Biosphere Reserves. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Then we have also joining us together, and I had joked and said this is a great reunion. Chris Groves drove down to be in person with Tom Gilbert, and it just warms my heart to see the two of you on screen. So allow me to introduce Chris Groves, who is a university distinguished professor of hydrogeology at Western Kentucky University, and whose international research connects local conservation efforts like the Mammoth Cave Biosphere region to global scientific understanding. So, Chris, thank you so much for making the trip to be with Tom and to be here. And then my dear Tom, Vernon Tom Gilbert, is a conservationist whose 7-decade career, I will repeat that just for anyone who wasn't paying attention. 7-decade career includes pioneering work at UNESCO in Paris to develop the world network of biosphere reserves, and serving as the first US Man and Biosphere, MAB, which you will hear in a moment, coordinator. So please join me in welcoming all three of these incredible guests to join us for this very special affinity group program. I'm so tickled. And before we get started, I do have a personal note that I wanted to share. I'm going to be moderating some of the questions that I've prepared for each of the guests. And then, of course, we're going to open it up as we always do. We want to hear from you and want to hear from you in terms of interacting with the speakers. But before I launch into some of the questions, I just wanted to share that I'm so delighted that this program has come together so quickly. Tom, before we get into the questions, when I had the pleasure of chatting with you on the phone some months ago, I was truly, and I still am, inspired by your story, by your work, by your advocacy. And so I knew that we had to make this happen, this program, because we need to hear your story. Others need to hear your story. And I am so glad that we are able to do this. I'm so sorry to hear that you're not feeling the best, but that's, again, a great impetus for us to come together for this very special program. So kudos, Tom. So thrilled that this is working out tonight. And maybe if you're okay with it, Tom, I will start off with you with a prepared question. Tom, you helped create the idea of UNESCO's biosphere reserves back in the 1970s. And I know some people on the call weren't even born in the 1970s, but can you explain how is a biosphere reserve different from what we know as a regular national park? And if you can, as you're explaining the difference, how has our approach in the United States really changed over the years as far as sustainable living, sustainable learning? I'll turn it over to you. Oh, I think you're on mute, Chris and Tom. There you go.
Can you, yeah, thank you. How's that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I said, wow, I'll try. But first, I want to say something about the number of, the most diverse, the number of species in a national park. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is my home area, has the advantage of having an all taxa biodiversity inventory and has for a number of years. Other parks have not had that kind of program. And I suspect that the answer might be different. Even, Everglades or might have as many or more species in the Smokies. So I just wanted to know that there is a real advantage to these inventories, like the all-taxa biodiversity inventory in the Smokies. Now, try to answer this question. I love the national parks, and I know pretty sure early on, growing up in the Smokies, that I wanted to work for the Park Service, to be either a ranger or a naturalist, preferably a naturalist. And I really would have been happy to spend the rest of my life working in a national park like the Smokies, or others that I worked in, like Cape Cod, National Seashore. But I had the opportunity. I'd always dreamed of going to Africa. And I had the opportunity when I was at Cape Cod because there was a position at the College of African Wildlife Management. So in 1965, I went to Africa. And the question about the difference between national parks and biosphere reserves is an important one, because national parks varied throughout the world, and some of them were still operating along the colonial model of preventing people and communities from utilizing the natural resources that they had traditionally had available. And so things had to change, because that wouldn't work in many national parks. And you couldn't restrict people who had for centuries utilized these resources. And so long as they were used sustainably, that was all right. And that was the story that we told in Africa. It had to be different. And the Biosphere Reserve program helped a lot, because, well, it's called Man in the Biosphere Program, and probably should have been called Humans in the Biosphere Program. But it had a very different approach. And that brought people and engaging communities much more involved. So this discussion is still going on. Charles Sims with the Howard Baker School at the University of Tennessee, who heads a program on energy, transportation, and environment, was a keynote speaker in Cambridge, England. And he loves to go to Cambridge. They're still discussing this problem about whether national parks contribute economic value to the communities. The loss of land is still resented in many areas. So it's a complicated question, and it's still going on, still being debated. But I would say that a biosphere reserve is definitely different, and has done a lot of work of value for national parks in this country and probably throughout the world. Now, is that getting at the question, the answer?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And we'll have time to probe a bit more, Tom. We're gonna get some audience questions as well, not just mine. But I think that definitely starts to address and gives us a little bit of perspective of how things have changed and how it's different, how a park is different from a biosphere. And maybe that's a great segue to Sarah, where I know you've crossed over in terms of paths. And you yourself worked at UNESCO headquarters, which is in Paris, within this Man and the Biosphere, or MAB program. And just from a humanistic standpoint, as an American witnessing this hot and cold relationship between the US and UNESCO, what struck you? I mean, can you share a little bit more about your experience and paint a picture of what that was like and what it's like now?
Sure. Farah, thank you so much. And I'd just really like to say it's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you tonight, and especially to share this virtual stage with Chris and Tom. Realizing we have quite a lot of young early career people on the call, I really recommend that you find some role models. Tom has been an incredible role model for me, and it's so inspirational to see people who've been doing work that I care very deeply about for a very long time. So I would just put that little plug in.
Can I tell you something? And when Sarah came down to be with me in the Smokies, and it was really delightful to be with her and her son, but I said at the end, Sarah, gee, I wish you could have worked with me when I was chief naturalist at Cape Cod. And she said, Tom, I wasn't born yet.
But I would have loved to do it. I would still love to do it. So
In another life. In another life.
We can talk about it. So I guess I should just say for folks who are thinking about their career also, when they're thinking about how one works as an advocate for UNESCO, or how one works inside of the UN. I joined UNESCO as a young professional, and that was an opportunity that was afforded me because UNESCO was a member, or US was a member state of UNESCO. And so I think the immediate effect of the US pulling out of these UN agencies is there are fewer opportunities for Americans to work inside of these organizations. So those Americans who are already there can continue, but there won't be new opportunities that'll be supporting Americans inside of these UN organizations, for the time being. But this is about politics, and it ebbs and flows. So we know with a longer perspective that this will not last forever. I will say, as an American inside the organization, it was very difficult working there when the US was not a member state. It did not feel particularly comfortable. Obviously, you're an international civil servant. You're working for the UN and the mandate of UNESCO. You're not working for your own country. But, it did feel uncomfortable being an American in an organization that the US was not supporting. And I think part of the goal of having kind of a representative secretariat of the different member states of the organization is that you bring in, their networks and their ways of working and their ways of communicating, and, all kinds of things that help these organizations work around the world. So it's difficult. It's difficult, but I have confidence that this is not a permanent direction. So it's a complicated question you asked, and I could go on for a long time, but I know we have a lot of other things to get to. So I'd be happy if people have specific questions to talk about it more. What I have done now that I'm no longer inside the Secretariat is when a friend and colleague has been offered a position in the Secretariat and asked if I would take over in an advisory role. Because of the moment we're in right now, I said yes. So even though I'm a volunteer in this work I'm doing advising UNESCO on biosphere reserves, I said yes, because I think it's important for Americans to stand up and just be reasonable people and contribute their expertise and put in their time and effort and be present. So that's what I'm trying to do now is bring my expertise and perspectives to bear on decision making at UNESCO. And so the advising I'm doing now relates to new biosphere reserves, and then biosphere reserves that are doing what we call their periodic review. And I feel like we need at some point to take a step back and just talk about different kinds of UNESCO designated sites, because
yes.
World Heritage Sites are what are most well known. And those are really areas of outstanding universal value. So those are areas which are designated for conservation, either for cultural values, natural values, or a mixed value. Biosphere reserves, when Tom started working on them, were unique ecosystems around the world, and the idea was to protect, as an act of peace, these unique ecosystems. And they've since evolved with concepts of sustainable development to include areas of human habitation and activity. And so they're more than just a core protected area. They're also the work of people in and around those sites. And then global geoparks don't yet exist in the US, but they are, the newest UNESCO designation around the world. And those are areas dedicated to important geological diversity, but also education, economic development, communicating about geohazards, things like that, climate change. But also in the US, we have other kinds of designations affiliated with UNESCO, like Creative Cities. We have chairs who are university faculty affiliated with UNESCO goals. We have something called intangible cultural heritage. There's a lot of different ways that UNESCO works on the ground in countries, including the US. But that's my turn, I think.
Yeah, no, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you actually for building out a stronger foundation of base knowledge about UNESCO, because you're absolutely right. There's so many different designations, but also ways that we could approach us as far as programming approach learning more about UNESCO, the different facets. And I might just ask a quick follow-up question, because I wasn't familiar with the global geoparks. Is that what the last one, that we don't have one in the US?
Sure. So UNESCO Global Geoparks, I'll give a shout out. We have a couple other experts on the call, Wes Hill and Tom Casteval. It's a global network. It doesn't yet include the US, but we've been active in other parts of the world. And there's a lot of great work on geological heritage that happens in the US through national parks, through state geologic surveys. So we have something, to contribute, if not sites in that network now.
Fabulous. And if I could, as you mentioned, we do have some other experts who have joined the call, and I would encourage you to share your wealth of knowledge as well. Sharing is caring, and for us right now, the more education that we have about UNESCO, the better, and the more that we can care. So please do feel free to share, tidbits. I know that our co-chairs are sharing tidbits of information about UNESCO from, an advocate standpoint, but we appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you so much. And maybe now to turn, Chris, to you. You've also had quite a bit of time dedicating your years, I think 40 plus years, to international scientific collaboration. We mentioned China a bit earlier. You earned a major honor from China for your work in hydrogeology, and then this within the UNESCO related framework. So Sarah touched on it a little bit, but from your perspective, Chris, when the US leaves UNESCO, unless we can prevent this before the end of 2026, what, in your opinion, is the most immediate and practical impact? What's going to happen with, your ability or others' abilities to conduct critical cross-boundary research on things that don't have boundaries, like water access or any type of environmental concern that doesn't see borders?
Well, first of all, Farah, thank you very much for your effort, your colleagues to get this together. I would like to kind of introduce, off the time left at the picture is Patty McGrew, who works as an assistant kind of aide to Tom, and she's been very much a part of this effort. So I want to acknowledge her.
Thank you, Patty.
So surprisingly, and anyone else on the call, feel free to chip in. But the answer to your question is maybe a little surprising. Kind of, what will be the immediate effect of the U.S. leaving UNESCO? And from my perspective, that's kind of here in the field, the trenches, you might say. And the answer is not that much. I mean, in some way, it's obviously huge. But it turns out that much of the work that's taken place, certainly within the Man in the Biosphere program, and these other kind of conservation programs, hasn't really been. MAB, for instance, the Man in the Biosphere program is a voluntary community of practice. Sarah Gaines and I and our young colleague Janelle Booker just got back the same week as the UN General Assembly. We were in China at the MAB World Congress. There was 4,000 people there, and we had a delegation of 3. And we were there. Sarah was actually representing UNESCO, but we were there, as volunteers, and we were positive. Just the great thing is we were there because of the passion. Even before the U.S. leaves UNESCO, there's already been very big effects. The UNESCO programs, World Heritage and Man the Biosphere were kind of administered, in the U.S. through the State Department and then through the National Park Service. There was two positions, two full-time positions on these organizations, and a few months ago, those positions and those organizations just were eliminated. There is no U.S. international program for the National Park Service. There's another one to the list that Sarah had, and that's the Ramsar wetlands. That was kind of administered through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And now it's, no one knows exactly what's going to happen. And I'm very pragmatic. I'm not saying this, because I'm complaining about it. We will still, all of us will still do what we can. But it's not even clear sort of, how reporting is going to go back to UNESCO for these programs. So that's kind of the downside is, in that way, it doesn't look at that different, because, a lot of this, the great bulk of this was done on our own time and, through our own passion. The two positions that were lost at the Park Service, Cliff McCready and John Putnam, both are still on their own time, continuing to contribute. So the great news is what the U.S. This community of practice offers. It is very deep passion. That's why we're doing this. And so as the UNESCO kind of waxes and wanes, the winds blow back and forth. The MAP program in the U.S. is steadfast. And so, just because it's people that do it because they love it. And a lot of our time in China, was virtually, this is a little exaggeration, but almost everyone else in the MAP program that we talked to were doing it because it's their job. If they weren't paid, they'd do something else. The 3 of us were there, on our own time because we care very deeply about it. And so I very much value that. That's my optimistic perspective, but that's really the way it is in my view.
That's incredible. That's incredible that, like many of the people who are joining the call tonight, you and Sarah and the others, who are participating in the delegation are doing it as passionate volunteers. And I just have to say that's very, very inspiring and helps us as, again, UN advocates and maybe outsiders to some of the details about, biospheres and that sort of thing. That's very motivational in terms of us continuing to build up and build out our advocacy. So thank you very much to all of you, and Sarah and Chris as well. And maybe Sarah, if I could come back and maybe digging in a bit further, since you also just returned, as Chris mentioned, from your trip to China. We touched on UNESCO Global Geoparks when I asked previously, but if the US does fully withdraw, as it's signaled to do at the end of 2026, the US is not going to have that chance to have a branded global geopark or, other protected areas. So is there something, especially because you worked in UNESCO, that you can share as far as what the UNESCO brand brings to mind from people that you work with, who you see on now that we know that you're volunteering as an advisor, what does that bring? And because I'm asking this question very strategically, because again, as average people, we know a little bit about UNESCO given our role with UNA USA, but what does that evoke for people that you encounter is this UNESCO brand and national parks or geoparks, etc.?
Sure. So the UNESCO brand means different things in different parts of the world. You know, in China, it's incredibly valuable. I think Chris and I were both just floored by the investment that country made in hosting us, in hosting this international event, this intergovernmental event, in valuing these sites, which have a UNESCO designated status. It brings huge prestige to those places in China. It brings huge tourism potential, economic opportunities. You know, it's incredibly important in a country like China. I think in the US, perhaps the brand of the UNESCO name is a little bit less well known. You know, we have the oldest national park system in the world. We have really fantastic national parks, and I think many Americans are proud and satisfied with that designation. But having this global recognition, being connected to a global network is incredibly valuable because it says something about the quality of the site. It says something about the peer sites around the world, something about, you know, the international significance that it really stands up alongside these other sites. There are economic benefits in some cases. I can't say for sure in the US in all cases in terms of increased tourism or something like this, but in other parts of the world, there is a real economic benefit. For me, the most valuable element is being part of a global network because you have all kinds of cooperation that happens with biosphere reserves and global geoparks, and you only get to be a part of that network and participating in best practice and cooperation and exchange if you're in the network already. The conservation value of these designations is actually perhaps not of significance in the US. You don't get protected by UNESCO if you have a biosphere reserve designation. It has to be protected by some national designation, like for most of our biosphere reserves, national parks. So UNESCO isn't protecting the site for you. In the case of World Heritage, UNESCO could delist the site if you're not conserving it adequately, but it's really not UNESCO who does the conserving. So I think it's important to say that UNESCO's not policing these sites at all. So that's not the value, but I think there's a lot of other value.
May
Excellent.
I
Thank
add something?
Yes, please.
Back a number of years ago, I formed the U.S. Biosphere Reserves Association, and we did a survey of the number of biosphere reserves in the U.S. at that time, and we got about 95% response. And most of them, the majority of them, said that the biosphere reserve designation helped them to get grants for research and education and various things. So that's a value that certainly biosphere reserves added.
That's a great bonus bonus point to add. And I will say I did want to just share off the cuff, and I recognize that I'm speaking about an example from World Heritage Sites, not from the biosphere's perspective. But when doing a little bit of research, because again, UNA USA is part of the UN Foundation, we've been a part of this journey back and forth between US and UNESCO. Back, I can't remember the year, but when the Alamo was designated as a World Heritage Site, there was a certain number of millions of dollars in terms of tourism that was brought with the UNESCO designation. So I can only imagine, you know, even if we don't have captured data and numbers, this is also very relevant to biospheres, you know, et cetera. So I think, and Sarah, great clarification too of what UNESCO does and doesn't do, so that we know its role. But I think that it's a good example of just one of the 26 World Heritage Sites that definitively said, you know, with this, we have more access to global tourism as opposed to limited to domestic tourism. So one could maybe extrapolate that same kind of, you know, apply that idea as well to biospheres. And I I want to be mindful because I don't want to hog up all the time with my questions that are burning in my mind. So Tom, I'm going to ask you this last moderated question, and then I'm going to have our fabulous audience members pose questions to you all, if that's okay. And Tom, because I had to say it, I had to pay homage to your age. Tom, at 97 years young, you have witnessed and experienced so much as it relates to our world, to climate change, and to the modification, I guess, of our environment, to say it mildly. Can you share what strikes you as the single greatest change in the relationship between, this is a big question, a very esoteric question, between humanity and the natural world? What has happened with this relationship over the past 7 decades that you've been involved in this work? And what is one essential lesson that you've learned about, again, you're meeting with members of our climate and environmental action affinity group. What is a lesson you want to share with us?
Okay. Well, first, I want to mention the George Wright Society. I'm hoping that Dave Reynolds is there because he could add a lot. But the George Wright Society, which was started back in 1981, is a premier society for research, interpretation, bringing people together to support national parks. And the George Wright Society has supported the Biosphere Reserves and World Heritage Program back for many years. So I want to acknowledge that. And I want to point out that it was a pretty difficult beginning. And when I went to UNESCO in 1973, because there was very little money, and other organizations, specialized UN specialized organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization and the UN Environment Program did not. They were enthusiastic about the idea, but there wasn't that much cooperation. And so it was a difficult beginning. And because of that lack of cooperation among the organizations, we formed the Ecosystem Conservation Group. And that went very well for a number of years. Then UNEP, which was chartered to help coordinate these specialized organizations, pulled out because they didn't have a secretariat. Now it's time to have such a coordinating communication mechanism, which particularly in this hard times when the UN is suffering drastic cuts, as well as the specialized organizations, we need and we can defend the UN and the specialized organizations much better if they work together more effectively, and it's not that complicated. So the other thing I want to mention is that now the network, the world network of biosphere reserves has grown to 784 sites in 142 countries. Just think about what potential that makes for defending the UN and the specialized organizations. There are thousands of communities associated with these biosphere reserves, and there are institutions that are associated with all of them. And if the UN associations can link with those institutions and this network, it has tremendous potential So, I'm really glad that the UN Association, the USA, has focused on high school students, 14 to 17 years old, and free membership. And I think that that's a great opportunity. But
Tom,
what is the biggest change that I know of from the time that I started with the UNESCO in 1973 and then came back in 1975 as the US program coordinator? There was really good collaboration with organizations like USAID. And a lot was done under USAID programs, and it's absolutely terrible what's happened to USAID. This is one of the worst things that I know that's happened, and the biggest change that I know of. That kind of, we had just really good relationships with USAID back then. Sure, it needed to be improved, but there were plans for improving it. To abolish the program is just, I don't know whether I've answered any of your questions or not. But
Tom, you had asked me to chime in. This is Dave. And I just wanted to mirror what all three speakers have said so far. But I do want to say that the George Wright Society has a website. And if you go on it, georgewrightsociety.org, you'll see that it has information on biosphere reserves. And then also it has the current biosphere reserves. And we also have basically a storage place where we have a lot of documents that you can look up and see. But I also agree with Tom that USAID was the saving grace for many of the programs that we had in the 70s and 80s and 90s. They did incredible work. And you know, I was a recipient of that as well, or it helped me in my career. So we still are doing what we can. I'm saying we now in terms of George Wright Society to support biosphere regions. The other thing I wanted to mention is that uh, I'm also affiliated with the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And one of the things that they're really focused on now is sustainability in agriculture. That's one of the major focuses as opposed to 4 years ago, or I should say increased from 4 years ago. So this is where biosphere regions can really uh, be a good intersection with the efforts that countries are making in sustainable agriculture.
Thank you. And thanks for adding that additional layer. And I've been reminded, because I'm not watching the time because I'm having too much darn fun, that we did want to pull in some audience Q&A, but I don't think that we'll have enough time. But Sarah, Chris, and Tom, if you are willing, I would love to make sure that these answers are responded to by our attendees. So if it's okay, and if I could email you some of these questions and then share the responses in our Affinity group. We have a virtual platform. And I definitely want to also introduce everyone to two people who are well known in this space. They're called our UNA USA Global Goals Ambassadors. I will introduce them in just a minute, but before I sign off on my portion of the program, I had a little request. as you may know, and I didn't do a very good job of introducing myself to people I don't know. So I'm actually the managing director at UNA USA, and I oversee membership, communications, and programming. And that first part is really important to me, membership. And because we are over 25,000 advocates strong across the country, I know Tom is an ardent advocate and has been helping to connect us, us being UNA USA, with other organizations. But I wanted to take this chance, Tom, if you will accept, to provide you with lifetime membership to UNA USA. And we have a great little graphic there of our certificate. But if I may, I just want to say that at 97, you're a living legend in this movement. And on behalf of the entire United Nations Association of the USA, we want to recognize you, and we want to recognize your extraordinary contributions, and thank you for all that you've done, all that you're doing, and all that you will do, and hopefully many more years to come. But we want to recognize you as a lifetime member appropriately. So Tom, thank you. And I'm so glad that we had this chance to chat amongst others.
Well, thank you. That's a tremendous honor.
Yes.
And then now get me a chapter that I can work with.
That is, yes, you could be our focal point for a chapter. Absolutely. You got it. Well, thank you, Sarah, Chris, and Tom, for this official part of the program. As I said, unfortunately, we ran up against time because there's so much great stuff to unpack. If you all are game, I will message the questions. We'll get it from the chat, and others can share more. But I am going to turn it now to our UNA USA Global Goals ambassadors. They are also volunteers who are passionate about particular UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so I'd love to welcome to the stage Emily and Susanna.
Hello, I'll go first. My name is Susanna, and I, along with Emily, like Farah said, serve as UNA USA Global Goal Ambassador for Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which works on protecting, restoring, and promoting the sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. I wanted to first say how honored we are both to be in the same event as such memorable and like incredible speakers who have really been laying the groundwork for us to be able to do the work that we're doing right now. Just to tell folks also a little bit about the UNA USA Global Goals Ambassador Program. The Ambassador Program selects up to 2 UNA USA members each year to serve as ambassadors for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And that's what brings me and Emily here tonight. Applications come out every summer if that is of any interest to anybody on the call right now. And then you can also follow me or Emily on our social medias to follow our work through the year. As ambassadors, we serve as reporters and public information specialists for Life on Land. And then currently, I serve that role as a master's student. I'm attending the University of Oxford right now in England, where I study biodiversity conservation and nature recovery. I also volunteer for an organization called Wildlife for All, which is working on creating curriculum on how to increase the organizing capacity within the wildlife conservation space. And then also staying very involved in my local town politics. There's a current development that's going on. It's one of the most contested developments in my state, where I'm from Maryland, and working to make sure that our forests and our green spaces within the town stay our green spaces within the town. I wanted to also say that this event is super special to me. National parks hold a really special place in my heart. As a young kid, I became a junior ranger at many national parks, did a road trip across country. I was 7, my younger sister was 5, and my mom was like, we're gonna go in the car for 2 months and we're gonna go camping to visit our family on the East Coast. We were living in Washington State at the time, and so West Coast to East Coast and then back to West Coast. It was about 11,000 miles that summer, which was crazy, but also fostered this love of conservation and really for life on land. And it was that love that then led me to applying and working at a UNESCO World Heritage Site, at a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and a national park, Yellowstone National Park, when I was in high school for 2 summers working for the Youth Conservation Corps of America. That was my first paid conservation job. I'd been involved in environmental projects before that. But then ever since I've been hooked, and I've specialized in One Health and human wildlife conflicts, which then took root in a thesis that I did in my undergrad, looking at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina and the Red Wolf Recovery Program, and then also looking at a crop protection fence in Kenya, where I was able to study abroad my junior fall. Conservation, as everyone knows on the call, is at a critical crossroads. It feels like every day there's another thing that's going at us, whether it be removal from UNESCO, whether it be USAID being defunded, whether it be, I mean, pick your topic. And so I also wanted to take this moment to just say how critical it is to keep contacting your representatives, whether that's federally, statewide, or locally. When we all use our voice, it's very, very powerful. And now I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who's going to give us a specific example on how UNESCO and national parks work together to collaborate.
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. So I'm Dr. Emily Guest, and I'm the other Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 15 Life on Land. I'm a conservation scientist at Oklahoma City Zoo and Botanical Gardens, so I'm based in Oklahoma. But one of the clearest examples of what I think about when we think about all this collaboration between national parks and UNESCO is a species that I've worked with for over a decade, the monarch butterfly. So monarch butterflies are a trinational species. They occur in Canada, the US, and Mexico, and they really need all 3 countries to work together on their conservation. They have declined by 90% in the last 30 years. So they have become a huge talking point. Like you'll see them on the news, you'll see them on magazine covers, you'll hear about them all the time because monarchs are just this icon of conservation. And they're already considered endangered in Canada and in Mexico under their systems, and they're currently undergoing the public commentary period of the ESA decision to list them as threatened with the critical 4D habitat rule here in the US. And part of the reason that monarchs are declining is they're really faced with 3 things: habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change. Habitat loss has really become the primary call to action for this species because they depend on milkweed as host plants for their caterpillars, and then when they're adult butterflies, they need nectar plants throughout their breeding grounds and their migration flyways, which is a very extensive range of lands. So as I said, it's a trinational species, so their range really extends from Mexico throughout the United States into portions of southern Canada. And because their habitat really occurs everywhere within that range, that includes rural areas, it includes densely packed urban areas that have gardens, and our own national parks really protect and manage some of the last remaining pristine wild grasslands that they use. But what monarchs are most famous for is their annual fall migration, which is occurring right now. I was out all day personally netting and weighing butterflies and collecting data on them and on their health as they pass through Oklahoma. They're all headed to Mexico, and millions of these butterflies are migrating right now and will be over the next week to 2 weeks. They're really going to get out of the US probably by the end of October. And they're all headed to one location in Mexico, which is the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I was lucky enough to actually visit this site last February. So even though I'd studied monarchs for over a decade, I'd never actually gone to see them at their famous roosting locations in Mexico until this year. And it was really amazing. I was there for a documentary with the zoo, and I saw tens of thousands of these butterflies, and I saw tourists from all over the world who were there to celebrate the beauty of this butterfly's migration. And what really stuck with me on that trip and over just this past year at multiple international monarch conferences is that the scientists in Mexico are facing the same problems that scientists like myself are facing in the US, which are the same problems that scientists in Canada are facing. Climate change, pesticide use, and habitat loss impacts all of us, maybe in different ways, but it's still the same problems when it comes to trying to reverse population declines for this species. Which also means that the conservation choices that we're making here, such as planting native species, protecting prairies, restoring our habitat, protecting our parks, it directly affects whether monarchs can make their destination in Mexico. And in turn, protecting those forests in Mexico determine whether those butterflies are able to make the journey north in spring. So whether we get our butterflies back depends on decisions that are happening in Mexico, just like whether Mexico gets the butterflies in the fall depends on the decisions that we make here. Because conservation isn't something that can really happen in isolation. Instead, it takes true collaboration and international cooperation to make a difference, which to me is truly the essence of what SDG 15 Life on Land is. UNESCO provides us this framework that connects these efforts, and it ensures the US can contribute to and benefit from global expertise. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I put a few things in the chat and I saw some others. So it's a really, really important work that you're doing. So thank you so much, Emily. And now I'm going to thank you for sticking with us. We're running over, but really good content. I'm going to turn it to Sierra, our other co-chair of the UNA USA Climate and Environmental Action Affinity Group, to close us out. Thank you so much, Sierra.
Thank you, Farah. And I want to say a thank you again to Sarah, Tom, Chris, Emily, Susanna, and again, Farah, for being able to participate and speak at our Affinity call today. This is such a special opportunity, and we're looking forward to more opportunities like this. For those of you that weren't able to join in the beginning of the meeting, I'll give a quick introduction. I'm Sierra Phillips. I am the additional co-chair for the Climate and Environmental Action Affinity Group alongside Owen. And my background is in marine sciences, and I work as an undersea specialist for National Geographic. And I first got involved with the UN as I was a speaker at the CSW conference in 2016, and then was able to speak again at the leadership conference. And I was connected to UNA USA actually by Farah, and we began the discussion for this affinity. So it's lovely to see all you attend and this enthusiasm, and we hope to see that enthusiasm grow. Again, just a few reminders to our co-chairs. We will be emailing you on further steps, and you will also be getting in our newsletter and in Slack responses to all the questions that didn't get answered in today's chat. In addition, because we are short on time, some of the activities that we're going to be in this closing section will be included in that newsletter. Just a quote I like to always begin with is by Beth Clark, and it's people who usually make a difference in the world usually do it in one way or another. And I've noticed something about people who make a difference in the world. They hold the unshakable conviction that every mind matters, every stomach must be fed, and every wound must be treated. They aren't determined to revolutionize the world all at once. They recognize that by small and simple steps, there can be great transformations to cities, nations, and yes, the world. And so we want to give a space for you to be able to be part of those small steps for transformation. UNESCO established a purpose to create an international standard for implementing large-scale programs, protecting heritage, and acting as a laboratory of ideas for global policy, working towards sustainable development goals to create more just and equitable, sustainable future for all. And so we will be providing a sheet for a laboratory of ideas that we can hear from you. We want to hear from your unique lens. As stated once in UNA USA's mission, we are dedicated to educating, inspiring, and and mobilizing Americans to support the principles and vital work of the United Nations and its specialized agencies such as UNESCO. So there is perfect alignment that we're seeing with the national parks and UNESCO. And we want to extend this platform not just to the members that are already here, but also those that are part of the national parks and UNESCO who would like to get involved. So if you're interested in getting involved, please message either myself or Oyan personally, or Farah, or Maya or Sarah, anyone in the group who would be able to provide you with those connections, or you can scan the QR code that you're seeing now on the screen. Now, another quote that I find great is by Vong Panan, and it says, "In the global arena, dialogue is the most important and powerful weapon for resolving conflicts and fostering peace." We're in a unique time right now in the United States where we are seeing some cutback for that space to speak. And so part of that resolution is to provide a space of dialogue for you. So UNESCO helps protect some of America's greatest treasures, from Yellowstone to the Grand Canyon, through its World Heritage Program. Rejoining UNESCO's World would restore the U.S. leadership in global conservation and strengthen the protection for national parks against climate and development threats. If you care about America's national heritage, please scan the next QR code and urge your members of Congress to support the U.S. re-entry into UNESCO. So we want to actually make a stance with our affinity group and with all of you today to help amplify that voice and to create a space of dialogue. So we hope that you want to follow through in that mission as well. So we'll provide that for you here on the screen. And please, if you have any other ways that you feel you can provide a voice and you would like to use our platform as a platform, please feel free to message us, because we want to amplify your voice. That is why this affinity was created. So again, join our affinity, and please look at signing that petition, which is also going to be shared in the chat. And thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your passion, your ideas. I hope to see more of those ideas in our laboratory of ideas. And thank you for everyone who stayed through this entire meeting. And I'll give the final closing remarks to Farah. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Well, thank you, Sierra, and may I just say ditto, 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 ditto. Thank you all. I would love to again continue to see action, as I hope you've all been inspired as much as I've been inspired by three greats. And Chris and Tom, I see your hand up. Are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just like to add some about my earlier comment. I think is an important way to end, and that is that I was being a little flippant. I was talking about sort of the the sort of the U.S. Position and at the MAP Congress. I didn't mean to imply the three of us cared deeply about what we're doing and everybody else was mercenary. It's not it at all. We're just blessed. There was thousands of people there. There's a worldwide community of people. It's their day job for some people, and it's not their others. But I don't know what else is on TV, but there's 40 of us taking our time now. So I just want to say that's a blessing. It's not just us that are passionate. There's people all over the world. And I thank all of you.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for also taking the drive. And by the way, Chris and Tom, I definitely want to see a selfie photo before Chris, you leave. But thank you all. If you're not part of UNA USA, it's a lot of fun, and we have a lot of important actions that we want to take, and we need everyone on this journey. So thank you all. We will be in close touch. And in the meantime, take care of each other, take care of our parks, and take care of yourselves.
Thank you.